such thing as certainty, it might be robots.
Wow, we are live, and we're trying to ignore the technology. Weird. Hey Dan, it's 2024. What has happened with podcasting since the last one that we did in 2006?
Well, now they have this a great big car service that comes to pick you up at your house first thing in the morning. And there's a whole open bar in the back, and you ride to the venue drinking mimosa, and there's just no technological problems at all. It's just smooth sailing.
I think you're describing a world in which we had kept podcasting for the last 18 years, which we did not. Anyway, my name's Dave Ponce. This is Dan Wright.
Hi, I'm Dan Wright.
We've known each other as friends, also as coworkers and collaborators for the last 30 plus years. I've done some pretty interesting and wacky projects, and one of the things that we did in 2005 and 2006 for a client of ours, we did a podcast that was environmental themed, and it was a part of a larger educational effort that included an environmental comic strip. And that podcast was called the Leave It Green podcast. And really what we did was typical podcasting format that's even out there today, although there was no video. But what we did was we talked about environmental issues, about things that were going on in our lives, and then we would typically have a guest, somebody of, in many cases, some stature in the environmental movement. And after about 10 podcasts in late 2005, treehugger.com, the world's largest environmental website, named the Leave It Green podcast one of the world's top 10 environmental podcasts. You know, we didn't even know there were 10.
We've both been dining out on that for so long.
We have screen grabs.
It's a real accomplishment right there.
Well, a big part of what was involved in that was, I think, showing up, which is still a really, really good rule, by the way. And the other part of it was that we really enjoyed talking together. And so over the last several years, we both work. In fact, we're podcasting from the Wings Etc. Grill and Pub in Noblesville, Indiana, near where each of us have lived over the last several years. Dan lives in Muncie, Indiana. I live in Lafayette, Indiana. But we have used this as a place that we have come many times to do various projects like photo shoots and shoots with the chicken puppets that were created in 2009. So anyway, in the process of all of that, and especially as we're having conversations, oftentimes we will get to the end of a really good exchange and say, man, that would have been a really good podcast.
Yeah.
And one of those in particular, it's the reason the name of the show is It Might Be Robots, is really about artificial intelligence and the ways in which AI is continuing to find its way, in many cases without us really knowing, but to find its way into our lives. And then also for us to be able to use the tools that are coming along with that to help us do what we do. So anyway, Dan, talk a little bit about your background and what you've done and what you do, and kind of both personal and professional.
Well, that like I come from a cartooning background and a performance background, like an acting and comedic performance, I think I would say, but always channeled through some kind of a character, be that a cartoon character. Like I said, I come from cartooning. And so I think in terms of character first, and I think in comedy first, before I think in other terms of how you would entertain someone. So I think of those things as a foundational idea in what I do creatively. But I'm a visual communicator and a visual artist, and Dave and I both share a thoughtfulness about graphic design and typography and all of those kinds of things. So both of our experiences using the AI have to do with, in some of the ways, how using the text to image generating AI. And not all, I mean, we're both using Midjourney, but we're also using Ideogram and some other things. So I come from visual thinking, and most of the creative projects that Dave and I have done together have that component somewhere in them. But Dave and I also have times of when we're just chatting through life. Now, I wrote this down this morning. It's our intention that It Might Be Robots be the ongoing conversation about artificial intelligence, and the way that we'll even use it in this very podcast and beyond, about life and music and art and humor and food and travel and candid expertise and the occasional guest. But Dave and I, through the years of just having conversations, we'll get to the end of maybe 3 or 4 hours of talking and ranging over some subjects. And like, yeah, that would have been 3 or 4 podcasts right there. And so this really is the attempt to, well, record some of these conversations and hopefully to get good enough at podcasting to ignore the tech and just chat.
Well, and a piece of that, and we actually thought we had our first podcast done yesterday. We were podcasting from right across the little roadway here in the Starbucks that's next to the Noblesville Winks, etc. And we were having some issues with trying to be side by side in the room and use two different audio tracks and having problems with echo and spill, and really kind of had to go back to the drawing board. And we're still working on a way that we feel like we can sit together at the same place, but still have two audio tracks. And there's news to come on that as we continue to solve that problem. But one of the pieces that really has been a part of this, both in getting ready to do this new podcast, has been video. Now we're at that point where really, if there's not video as a part of what you're doing in a podcast, it limits a lot of what happens, for example, on YouTube and searchability, and whether or not you're going to get in front of some people that maybe would be interested in listening to you. And to Dan's point, and by the way, eloquently written there, Dan. That was really good.
Well, I wrote that while I was driving.
Yeah, that's
Don't try this at home.
Right. To me, I don't know who wants to listen to this. I believe there are a whole bunch of people out there that are kind of like us in the sense of related to AI. You're going about your everyday life, and especially this is true of creators, people who have been writers or in some way are in visual communication or are in some expression of communication, music or other kinds of composition, where you're seeing along the way tools coming into use that increase the impact of your expression. People who are used to doing it the other way are concerned about it. They don't really like the idea of it being that way. And that really happens every single time there's a technological shift. And so that's happened now with AI. So in our early discussions of this podcast idea, this is kind of how it went. We started using AI kind of to help us develop, well, let's just give ChatGPT, let's give Google Gemini, let's give it some backstory on us and talk about, here's who we are, here's what we've kind of been doing for the last several years, and we are about to start a podcast. And so give us some ideas for show names and things like that. And of course, any of you that have used ChatGPT or something like that, a large language model that's text to text, it's like using ChatGPT for ad copy. It's just hysterical how flowery and kind of sick making it could be. But it's giving us show name ideas that were just kind of silly, where it's trying to migrate something about AI into maybe music and other interests of ours. And none of it really was good. And Dan said to me, let's just call it the Dave and Dan Show. And it would have been the Dan and Dave Show if it hadn't been for about 16 years ago. Nike supported a couple of decathletes named Dan and Dave. And so they took that website name, but miraculously, daveanddan.com was available, so we got that. And we were kind of operating under that process for the last, several days. And then about a week ago, I called Dan and I just said, hey, man, I've been thinking about this a lot. And I think we ought to call the show It Might Be Robots. And Dan laughed out loud on the phone, which for me, there aren't that many sort of markers of high praise. If I can make Dan Wright laugh, that's a pretty good marker. I've said this to Dan before. What I've learned from Dan over the years that I've known him in terms of creative process is when Dan comes in the room, the fun either begins or gets tweaked up a few notches. And the other thing that I've learned from him is nothing's really, in its formative stages in particular, nothing's really sacred. You have to be willing to take all these ideas in the early formative stages and kind of throw them out or break them, even if you've gone down the road with them a little bit. And so the idea of us changing the name of the podcast before we had recorded the first one wasn't that bizarre. But I was excited about him liking the name because it brings a lot of things with it that are kind of fun. And if you think about the dark side of AI, like the dark side of every technological shift, it is that issue of, hey, do we know whether that video of that politician making that speech is really them? Hey, what happens at the point at which the AI gets the launch codes? Is the AI going to realize that human beings are awful and end us all? It's all of those other dark sides to this. And so the It Might Be Robots name sort of presents itself in a way that really is potentially a lot of fun. And It's leading to some other things that we'll probably talk about or sing about at some point. But yeah, so it might be robots works for us in no small part because the AI is both good in a lot of ways when you think about it and potentially bad in a lot of ways. So I'd like to start the discussion past the introduction, and I'll say this about myself. Mostly what I have been over the years as is an advertising copywriter and creative director, and I have done a lot of video production and audio production associated with commerce. So a lot of it's been food related, a lot of it's been franchise related. In my last 18 years, Dan's last 18 years, has involved Wings Etc. Grill and Pub, a small Midwest-based sports bar chain that's now up to 80 locations. And we've been really at the kind of the tip of the spear of driving the creative and the concepts for how Wings Etc. sells its products and services. Anyway, that's been a big part of what I've done. I've also been a member of Nashville Songwriters Association over the years and used to write mostly for fun novelty song lyrics and things like that for country and bluegrass. And Dan and I both have been involved in performing music and in songwriting, some of it for commercial purposes, like for clients, some of it just for our own entertainment over the years. So we both come at this in a lot of ways as writers, as collaborators for a concept that maybe is going to be turned into a visual expression in some way. And so the AI is a very interesting place to live in that world. So, Dan, I'll start first because I kind of precede you a little bit in the AI use.
You did.
Here's how I came to my first sort of use of AI. In October of 2022 was when most of us heard about ChatGPT. Somewhere in that range, October, November, it started making the news. What is this thing? It's the first sort of publicly available expression of AI where you get to give the AI input and see results, and you can ask it questions about things. And there, of course, were a lot of misunderstandings about what it was, but there were also some kind of interesting things that were being said early on about potential danger. And my wife, Jenny, and I talked about it a little bit when it happened. And it came up again over the holiday season here and there. And then at some point in like February of 23, maybe early March, Jenny was sitting at her kind of standing desk in the kitchen area of our house. And she just leaned out and said to me, "Hey, I think you need to pay attention to the ChatGPT AI thing." And I was in front of my MacBook, as I often am, and I was doing something else. And I was like, yeah, okay. And she walked over to me and kind of got in my face and said, "I think you need to pay attention." And she wasn't talking about me listening to her. She was talking about paying attention to what was happening with AI. And she's been doing Duolingo now. She's been years in learning Spanish that way. And so she was leaving to go to Guatemala to be in an immersion program. And during the 2.5 weeks that she was gone, I decided, okay, I've got some time on my hands here. I'm going to start digging into the AI. And my first experience was I got a ChatGPT account. Based on my background as somebody that likes writing novelty songs, I asked ChatGPT to write country song lyrics for me. And again, think offbeat novelty. I said, here's the prompt. This is a country song, 3 verses and a bridge about a young woman who is a pole vaulter. And she is a very talented pole vaulter, and she's at the nationals to try to make it into the Olympics. The rest of the prompt was, and on her last attempt that she needs to make the Olympics, her vaulting pole breaks. ChatGPT, give me 3 verses and a bridge, and seconds later, it yields something that for me was remarkable because it was absolutely not usable on its face. But what it brought with it were some really fun ideas. The thing that impressed me the most was it understood that I was trying to be novelty, campy, offbeat. It understood that the setup that I was giving it because of the genre and because of what I was asking for as a storyline, it knew that. And so the lyrics that it presented to me were in some cases tongue-in-cheek and pretty clever. And I have sons that are musicians, and these are people that are writing songs and going and doing gigs on a regular basis. And so I sent a text to all four of my children, also to their two older sisters who have been writers over the years. And I just sent them, I said, hey, you guys, I started messing around in ChatGPT and I gave it this prompt, and here are the lyrics that it sent me. And here's the thing, they're not really usable, but they're about 70% of the way there. And that created their trial and looking into it for different things in their lives, and really started for me down the road of, let me look at other things that are like ChatGPT. Let me look at some of the things that are out there for text to image. And so that was my first experience with it. And then it led to me texting Dan, and especially with an image that I had rendered from Midjourney, and saying, oh, man, go look at this. So anyway, take it from there, Dan.
Well, your first conversation with me was intriguing enough for me to get hours into ChatGPT. And I didn't buy a Midjourney account at first, but I too was really taken with that it can't tell you no, and the language model is large enough.
It doesn't get bored.
No, and you're not going to stump it. And you've already touched on, to me, the feeling I had pretty quickly after using Midjourney was this is like hiring a team of designers, because I can describe to them the project that I am after, the finish line. Here's the finish line. I want this. If it's a text to image, you have an idea of what that is. If you have a text to text, I need a script for this. I need a such and such, and it was intriguing enough immediately to just draw me right back to, oh, I see how useful this is. And it really, having the conversation about the AI has been, we've talked about this, it's the unofficial conversation of a number of gatherings that I'm a part of with other people. If they've not used the AI, they're curious about the AI, they want to know more about what this is, how it's going to, how I think, how other people think it's going to affect the landscapes of a lot of different disciplines and enterprises. Who would have thought that the computer would actually do a decent job, 80%, 70% of the way there, of describing, here's a visual that I want to see. You and I, we talked yesterday in the podcast that's now just lost to the ages about...
It was too echoey. People couldn't listen to it.
Describing to the AI sections of fried chicken. That's a hard thing to say. I want this piece of, because if you say breast, like I want a chicken breast, and you can use all of the descriptive language, but Dave's experience was, oh, well, the AI, oh, I can't do that. That violates my standards of performance, or my standards of operation. So learning how to prompt and learning the things to say and learning the editing language really to get to a finish line on these. And I remember the first things that you sent me were, you sent me 2 images of freestanding Wings Etc. restaurants that you could give it architectural specs, you could give it square footage specs, you could do all of these sorts of things. And I remember the difficulty it has, or had then, and I don't know now, we've not tried this, was trying to get the AI to understand a covered exterior space.
Yeah.
The AI was really good at understanding what an interior space was or what an exterior space was, but to get it to sort of understand it's a hybrid, it's a covered area, but it's open to the outdoors. Like, boy, the AI really struggled with doing that, which is really interesting. But regardless, the returns that you got, that you shared with me, I think there were probably 5 or 6 people that within 48 hours I had shared that with and said, listen, this is, I'm not, don't share these abroad, but look, and this is not really a sharing about Wings Etc. so much as look at what the AI in descriptive language only is capable of giving you in a visual space. And I'm still I'm still mesmerized by how it's compelling to see how good it is.
Well, and it was actually Stable Diffusion that rendered the most satisfying version of that prototype that Dan is talking about. And it was hysterical. You'd give it these terms like a covered patio, a patio with seating that's accessible from a side entrance, and it just could not synthesize that into a patio, and it would create an awning, and then there would be chairs on the roof of the building, or it was just, anybody that's messed with AI, you do understand how odd sometimes its work product becomes. But you have some patience and you do some learning of how the prompting works with a particular platform, and you can start to get to some pretty satisfying things. But anyway, in that whole process of learning and developing better habits and better copy and paste like reserves of, oh, that prompt did a really good job, Dan and I have both come up with these sort of conditional words that we use to generate better results for what we're trying to get to. You mentioned one, Dan. What was the one that you incorporate a lot in your
Vintage was
right,
vintage was
yeah.
a word choice that instantly gave any return to a text to image a feeling of history, a
Yeah,
feeling that it came from, which I mean makes perfect sense. But to just think about that prompting language
yeah.
and
And one of the ones I was using a lot was award winning, hyphenated award winning, or
yeah,
professional award winning. So that when I would describe a photographic scene of a piece of food that's been styled and it's a basket of wings in a sports bar, I would say, as if styled by an award winning, successful food stylist and photographed by an award winning, commercial photographer that specializes in tabletop food photography. A big part of what happened that couple of weeks while Jenny was out of the country and I was really doing a deep dive in this, as I was doing Google searches, of course, and I came across a YouTube video, and we'll find it and put the link to it in the threads of this. But it was a YouTube video by a guy, and I think he's from Finland. He is a video game creator, and he is also a composer. He composes digital music that is used in video games, some of his own and some others. And he did a video, and this was, I think it was March of 23. And the video essentially was the current state of the art in creative related artificial intelligence. And this 90 minutes is one of the things that I sent to Dan early on. I sent him a link. I sent the same link to my kids. I think even to some folks at Wings, etc., as well, to just be like, go watch this
yeah.
if you have time. And this guy starts at the very beginning of the video saying, I am not here to take a moral stand on anything. If that's what you're expecting from this video, this is not that. What I'm going to do is talk to you in these very specific categories about the current state of artificial intelligence as a tool for people who create. And he said, at the end of this video, I will have some people that will talk about this that do have opinions. One of them was an art teacher, for example, and there were some other people as well that were creators. But then he went through kind of point by point. Here's what writing AI looks like. Here's what visual communications and static images looks like. Here's what the emerging category of video looks like, text to video. Here's what synthesized avatar creation from your likeness looks like. Here's what voice digitizing looks like. Here's what music creation looks like. One of the things he showed in the video was there's a music creating platform, an AI platform, and I think at the time it gave you 3 minutes of unpaid. And you go into the interface and you go, I want these instruments and I want this style. And at the time, although some of these things have changed because of lawsuits, at the time you could say, I want a 3-minute movie theme for a science fiction film in the style of John Williams. And then you would choose the instruments in that. And it would create some pretty credible orchestral kinds of themes. And then the other thing that it would let you do, and this is 16 months or so ago, it would let you go in and you would see a timeline of the creation of the music. And you could pull up places in the timeline to create a swell. So if you wanted the storyline to actually crescendo earlier in the composition than later, you could make those changes in real time and it would play them back.
Gosh.
I was watching that just thinking, you got to be kidding. And then you could export that as an MP3 file. And again, everybody that's a music creator, everybody that's ever sat in a recording session to play an instrument that's going to be used in a soundtrack for a commercial or whatever, is mortified by those things. So those have been some of our early experiences with it. And the other thing I will say about this, it is entertaining. It is entertaining. You are surprised so much by what it yields. And in many cases, it's completely useless except for its sort of humor factor. And sometimes it's very, very funny what it thinks you mean when you give it a prompt. And that's a piece of it that's a little bit infectious, honestly, that you can get into the weeds long past the time that it solved your problem that you needed it to help you solve. And now you're just kind of entertaining yourself by styling prompts. It's pretty cool.
There have been also, you've had the experience as I have of you can ask the AI to give you try it again, try it again, try it again, reuse the prompt. And there does seem to be, for some projects anyway, like they degrade the way that a photocopy degrades. After a while, the AI stops giving you like, no, it's not going to get any better than that one about 13 or 14 back.
Absolutely.
That's the good one. But which is interesting, and I think that's another thing that no, that's probably going to get none of it has stayed the same. Even some of the initial AI that you and I were using is now very different than when we first started using it. So all of this is sort of a Wild West show, and it feels like surfing the edge of the technology, really.
Yeah, especially because there's an expectation when it yields something that's so excellent and so fully realized or almost fully realized, there is the belief along with that experience that it has mastery that it does not have.
Right.
I'll give you a specific example of this. I was trying to get to using Ideogram to create a text like t-shirt design. So Ideogram was the first really of the text to image models that was doing a good job with rendering type. That if you said Dan and Dave show in this kind of a style with this color palette, the type would actually read Dan and Dave show. It wouldn't be like 4 A's and an E that's partly there, which is what a lot of these text to image models do. But anyway, I was doing a t-shirt design idea, and I mentioned in about the third iteration, simplified to line art so that it could be easily used on a t-shirt or other apparel. And it decided it was going to put t-shirts in every other render.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like the next thing it gives me is it's some of the art and it's on a t-shirt. I'm like, nope, I don't want an image of a t-shirt. And I tried, and this is all of you that have been doing this, you understand what this is like. You go, okay, this time I don't want you to have any apparel. I just want type. The t-shirt's going to be in there, man. It just is. And then you get to the point where, and I will express this, and maybe you do too, Dan, I will say, well, Gemini, this is really disappointing. And clearly, even though I've told you multiple times, I do not want a microphone in this picture. You're just going to put a microphone in there, and I don't get it, Gemini. Why?
Yeah.
And then it will always give you back that, I am so sorry. I am really a programming tool that is always under development, and please forgive me, and I hope you'll continue to use me. And it really does get to the point where I ask it to reset. I say, hey, ChatGPT, can we go back 30 minutes? And can you please forget everything we've talked about for the last 30 minutes? And sometimes that works, but I'm going to tell you, it mostly doesn't work. Once it decides something's going to be in the image, it's there, man.
I'm hopeful that at some point you can just pull up, like Suno is the name of the one that I was using that was a music generating AI. And it would generate, you could, as simple as, give me a country western song about not needing to stop at the roundabout. And it gave me a fun novelty song. Like, wow, it's got a larger language model than most people that you're going to talk to, because it's machine language. By the way, having the robot programmed to apologize to me, that's probably as close as a programmer gets to writing a joke. Probably like an apologetic robot. Like, it reminds me of that Simpsons quote, like, why was I programmed to feel pain?
Yeah.
Which is hilariously funny. Like, that robot just apologized to me. Man, it's unnecessary.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. But one of the things I like about the prompting language, and I'm sure we'll never be done talking about developing the prompting language, is that you could use haiku to describe what you're after, and the AI is going to give you something.
I've done a lot of novelty AI haikus. Try that. Dip your toe in a humorous haiku about something. You will be delighted.
The AI is good at haiku.
Yeah.
Well, it's close to an insect language, isn't it? I mean, the robot speaks insect language. So giving it tiny parameters, like the robot's really good at that. As Dave said, we do work for Wings, etc. There are a lot of flavors here that you can choose from. Well, we once, during one of our conversations, we're talking about each of the sauce names having its own sort of type treatment and logo treatment.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
I remember describing to one of the AI that we were using, I think this was Ideogram still,
It was, yeah,
and
that's right. Yeah.
I said I want this to, and I don't remember what. Let's say it was hot barbecue, but I asked for the please give me the phrase hot barbecue in a typographical treatment that feels distressed and feels as if perhaps it was spoken by country star Trace Adkins.
That's
And
right.
it came back with such a great smoky. It was so gritty and didn't have any cuteness. It was friendly without being cute. Like, wow, that's really accomplished.
Yeah.
Like if you were to ask a first year college student, here's your assignment, art student, come up with this for me. And they gave you that, you'd have given them at least a B,
Right,
probably an A. Like,
right.
no,
That's
that's,
right.
hey man, that is really close to being there. And so far, I think that's been both of our experiences. It's why we keep coming back to using it, is because, that is about 80% of the way there. And like
Yeah.
my wife was a cautious, she's an artist as well, fine artist, and cautious about any use of the AI. Just, no.
Yeah.
One, I don't want it to learn how I do what I do, which was my own sort of feel, it's that same, no, Frodo, you would offer me this ring because I would have it use it with a desire to do good, but through me it would wield a power too terrible to
Right, right.
comprehend.
That's right.
I don't want the AI to understand how I create what I create. It's not how it works. But regardless, she stayed away from the AI. But she saw me using, and I showed her a few things, and we were doing some projects together. We happened to, earlier this year, our local theater in Muncie Civic Theater, asked Carrie and I if we would please do some of the design work and paint work for the set for the show Mary Poppins. Now, it's very different from the movie Mary Poppins, but it's still it's P.L. Travers. Forgive me if I got that wrong. I think it's P.L. Travers is the author of Mary Poppins, the story, and I think there's more than one Mary Poppins story. But regardless, it's still some of the characters you recognize. Bert is in it. The family is in it. But for Carrie and I to use Midjourney, and I watched her get her own Midjourney account and to start asking it, please give me illustrations. They should be watercolor and pen and ink illustrations that would be comfortably at home in a stage production of Mary Poppins. The buildings need to look like London from, let's say, 1910. And she started describing how she wanted these returns back in the AI. And she did all of her initial passes, even describing hexachrome colors and Pantone colors into the AI for the returns that she would get back. And it wasn't that she used any of those things as, okay, I'm just going to lift from here and plug that into there. It was like looking at somebody's Pinterest board or sketchbooks in order to, okay, I'm using this and I'm using this and I'm using this. And we said this yesterday. The AI seems to be a really great mirror of you creatively. Like it can't make up its own stuff. You have to bring to it the prompting language. And if you ask for very simple things, you get a very simple return. If you start asking for complicated editorial sorts of things, and the higher the language that you use in your prompt, the better the return that you get. And I mean, the more careful and considered language that you use in your prompt. And I'm not done being astounded by what the robot is able to do. Thus the name. It might be robots. By the way, can you please talk about, Dave, what AI that we are using on this podcast in order to do this?
Sure. We're kicking the tires on several different platforms in the years since we did the Leave It Green podcast. So many people have come into the podcasting universe, and it becomes another one of those side hustles like having a t-shirt store. And so everybody's looking for ways to shorten the distance between what they want to say and how people can easily get to a place where they can hear it and see it. And one of the things that's happened is software has come along that really is doing amazing things with recording and then also with post-production. And the one that we're using right now is called Riverside FM. It's been around for about 4 years. There are other competitors out there that are like it. Descript, now that it has Squadcast as a part of Descript, once they acquired Squadcast, it became a very similar experience where here's how it works. You want to have a meeting, whether it's a live meeting like Zoom, or you want to have a recording like that's going to be turned into video for a podcast. You set everything up. We're using smartphones actually as the cameras here. We're using Samsung S20s. And then we're using wireless lavalier mics really on a single audio channel that's going in to the podcast. But essentially what happens is you dial in guests from their devices. And unlike what happens in a Zoom meeting, where if somebody's bandwidth starts to suffer, everything about the recording, if you're recording that live, suffers. What happens in these software applications is the devices themselves are recording the audio and video to the individual devices, independent of bandwidth. And at the end of this podcast, when you click end, all of the devices that are participating upload to the Riverside server the video and the audio from the devices, so there's no loss. Once those get uploaded, then Riverside takes those pieces of information, the audio tracks, the video tracks, and by the way, it assembles them separately so that we could dump them down and put them in Premiere Pro or something like that if we wanted to do that. But its onboard AI does these things. It knits together all of those pieces in a way that is a synced, fully real live video. But beyond that, what it does is it transcribes the content and gives you a transcription. And if you have 2 channels or more going and every single one of those people that's participating has his or her own audio channel, then those are broken out in separate tracks. And you have the ability now to have extraordinary amounts of editing on the video by editing the text. And if you really want to take this whole section out, you just go grab the text for that and hit delete, and the video gets edited and the audio gets edited, and that just disappears. And it's even to the point with AI tools where, for example, if you meant to say watermelon at the end of a paragraph about something, but you said cantaloupe, and you realize after the fact that that's what happened, you go into the text where it says watermelon and you change it to spell out cantaloupe, and it will go take your voice samples and your mouth movements, and it will replicate the way your mouth would say cantaloupe, and it will use your voice to generate a synthesized version of you saying that word. And it's very seamless. And so again, you look at that and go, oh no, what can that mean? Totally get it. But it also means that you can make those kinds of adjustments to something and make real solid editorial decisions after the fact. And so that's what it does. It creates chapters as a part of the production, so that when you see its first pass and an edited video, the chapter markers and the verbiage is in there for each chapter marker so that it's ready to upload to YouTube, which is really the place where these things are going these days. And then beyond that, it gives you a show summary with bullet points of the chapters as a text file. It takes what it believes are the best parts of the podcast and renders those as 1:1 and as reels 9:16 format, and gives you those as clips to use for posting to social media. It gives you suggestions for keywords that you might use for hashtags. And all of this happens once you stop recording. The upload finishes. Once it's finished, Riverside gives you a note that says it's ready for you to go look at it. It's ready for you to edit. And all of these other pieces fall along with what it creates for people who are completely outside of audio and video editing is a means to get to market. But this software gives people really the ability to go, there is so little friction in recording and having a satisfying edited production that's ready for upload that it will probably ensure for me frequency and will also probably help build quality into it. So it's that kind of stuff that's being used. And again, I'm not sure that we'll stay with Riverside. There are a lot of things about it we like.
It might be robots. 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 It might be. Such thing as certainty. It might be